back to the Fascinating Jobs podcast. I'm your host, Mackenzie Wilson. On this episode of the podcast, I'm sitting down with Chef Dr. Mike, a cardiologist, author, and professor of culinary medicine at the University of Montana. We'll be talking all things food, cooking, health, and culinary med. As always, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen so that way we can grow our community. With that, let's get into episode number 11 with Chef Dr. Mike. All right. Hi, Chef Dr. Mike. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you. How are you doing?
I am doing great, Mackenzie, and thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So before we start, do you want to quickly introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. As you said, Chef Dr. Mike kind of says it all. So I am what we call an interventional cardiologist, which means when people have heart attacks in the middle of the night, I'm the guy that goes in there and opens those arteries up. Before I went to medical school, I actually started as a dishwasher to help work my way through college. And so I had a love of food, involved in the industry. Eventually, I went back and got my culinary degree. And I've cooked professionally, so I started as a dishwasher, worked my way up the ranks back in the day. And now I've kind of combined those two things, and I teach what's called Culinary Medicine at the University of Montana.
Awesome. So for our listeners who aren't familiar, could you just give us a brief explanation as to the field of culinary medicine?
Oh, sure. And actually, it's not just your listeners. It's a very new discipline that's kind of emerging. It falls in the category of when we talk about its perspective from medicine. It's kind of in preventive medicine and what people are referring to these days as kind of lifestyle medicine. So affecting health through looking at ways we can change our lifestyle. And at the university, like all academic courses, we have to have a very specific definition. So ours is that it's a multidisciplinary, evidence-based approach to food and techniques used in the preparation of meals with an eye towards maximizing health and wellness through an optimized food experience. And so that sounds like a lot, and it is a bit of a word salad, but really what makes our course a little bit different from some of the approaches you'll find out there is that first word, which is multidisciplinary. And that means that it's not nutrition with a tasty kale recipe like a lot of the offerings are. So we're looking at things like sociology, we're looking at psychology, we're looking at environmental sciences, and we're taking all this information in as well as looking at the ingredients that we use in preparing, the different meals that we make. And we do that by looking at the science with the best evidence that we have to date. And that's something that's always changing. In fact, I was grading some papers before we got on, and one of the things that the students are on in the course right now is something called the gut microbiome, which talks about all the bacteria, the trillions of bacteria that live in your gut, and how we really have to change our perspective on the planet with regard to our health, because we're not isolated just eating food. These bacteria, as we're learning, can actually start to affect us even before you're born. And then from the moment you're born up until probably your early 20s, this bacteria is always talking to your brain and affecting your brain and your gut and your health and setting these neural pathways in, which is why, when we look at how food has changed, particularly over the last probably 50 to 75 years, we find this incredible increase in things like inflammatory bowel disease and IBS, or irritable bowel disease. And we're learning that a lot of this has to do with the foods that we ate, the emotions that we have, how we ate them, when we ate them, and they form these neural connections. And so that's why sometimes people now, they can get really tense if they think about something and it affects their gut. So these gut feelings that we have are real, and they affect the way our neurons are wired in our brain. And some of these gut feelings that we get are actually the result of metabolites produced by bacteria. So it's a crazy perspective that you're actually not just you're this whole ecosystem with trillions of bacteria that are constantly talking to you and your brain in the background. So that's part of what we do in culinary medicine as well as we make tasty recipes for sure.
Wow, that sounds so interesting. And I like the way that you put it, that you're kind of looking at things from a different perspective from, like, say a nutritionist or something like that. And so it's a relatively new field, as you mentioned. So how did you kind of discover the culinary med field?
Well, I think a lot of that comes from my own unique perspective. So my story is that I was working as a physician. I had the culinary background, cooked professionally, so on. So I've always had this kind of love affair with the kitchen and food growing up. But in my high school days, I did a whole lot of athletics, and I had in my head that I was a really great athlete, and it turns out I probably wasn't. I definitely wasn't. So I've got a lot of bad joints from broken bones and torn joints and things like that from sports and not executing sports very well. And so one day, I was actually, before I was getting married, we were going to head over to Europe, and we got married in Scotland. And I had an ingrown toenail. And I said, I don't want to go over to Europe. I want to do some hiking, and I don't want this to be something that flares up over there, so I'm going to get it taken care of beforehand. So I went and saw a podiatrist, and he comes in the room, and they take your x-rays because you're a new patient, and he looks at this, and he's like, and he goes out, and this happens like 3 or 4 times. Finally he comes in, and he goes, can I ask you something? I was like, yeah, sure. He's like, do your feet hurt? And I was like, yeah, my feet hurt all the time. He's like, how are you even walking? And, I was in the hospital on my feet 10, 12 hours a day, and I had really bad joints in my toes and in my ankles from injuries and then the use over the years. And he told me right then and there I needed a joint replacement on one foot, and then probably within 5 years would need it on the other foot. And I said, thank you very little. And can you take care of my ingrown toenail, which he did. And I looked at what I could do to reduce the inflammation, because I know that arthritis, even osteoarthritis, has its roots in inflammation. And my diet was horrible at that time because I was a busy physician, so I was eating here, there, everywhere. And so I completely changed my diet. Now, I got to tell you that they told me that, almost 20 years ago, and I still haven't had a joint replacement, and I just got back this morning from biking 20 miles. So there's things that I can't do. I can't go run on the pavement. I can't play basketball with high impact. But that is a result of me practicing culinary medicine, changing, my outcomes by the foods that I ate. And so as, I started and been doing cardiology for many years, I got a little frustrated. I was tired of just fixing people to have them go back out and come back in with another heart attack. And just, everybody just giving everybody pills. And I was like, when I look at the information out there, and the American Heart Association was telling people that they can't eat walnuts because they had saturated fat, or they couldn't have an avocado because it had lots of fat in it. I was like, this isn't right, because those foods are delicious and they're natural. So what does the evidence really show us? And that's why I set out on the path of creating, our version of culinary medicine not quite a decade ago. And then the last several years, I was fortunate enough, one of my books was read by the dean of the College of Health here at the university, and I met with him and was lucky enough to be accepted onto the faculty to develop this program. And just this summer, actually just about 2 months ago, our Introduction to Culinary Medicine course, which is all taught online, we actually were able to make it available to the general public. So now anybody can take this college course, Introduction to Culinary Medicine, and they can get a certification from the university in culinary medicine, a level 1 culinary medicine certification. So we're really excited with where it's heading.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that seems really interesting. And I think that it's so cool that it's kind of like a pioneered, like, new field. And I feel like, as you were mentioning, like, the American Heart Association says that, you shouldn't eat walnuts or avocados. Like, it's kind of interesting to, like, figure out where the root of those things is from.
Well, a lot of it, and we actually talk a little bit about it in the course. I talk about it more in the books because that's sort of, we've got so much to cover in the course. But the long and short of it is when you look at the data and you drill down, and I'm sorry to say, a lot of it has to do with politics. And it has to do with the politics in the 1970s, believe it or not. There was this big war between the United States and a guy called Ansel Keys, who wrote a study called the Seven Countries Study. And that really solidified our approach to food and health with cut out the fat. You know, you've got to reduce the dietary cholesterol, can't have salt, all those sorts of things. And he was up against someone from the UK, a professor called John Yudkin, and he said, no, you know, it's not this fat or cholesterol, it's sugar. Sugar and refined carbohydrates are the real problem. And unfortunately, because of the politics of the situation, which I talk about in one of my books, Fallacy of the Calorie, and my latest book, Food Shaman, it goes into detail there. But suffice to say, you know, that set us on the wrong course for over half a century. And what's interesting about the Seven Countries study is it had 7 countries. And it showed that when you ate saturated fat, bam, you developed heart disease. It was like a perfect line. And anytime you have a perfect line in a study, you need to dig a little bit deeper because nature doesn't work that way. There's always some outliers. Having done you know, a lot of research. And it turns out, and Ansel Keys died some years ago, so we'll never be able to ask him, but he actually collected data on about 22 or 23 countries. But he only published the 7 that made him look really good. So
yeah.
in countries like France, where they ate a lot of saturated fat, but they had no heart disease, that wasn't mentioned. Other countries where they didn't eat much fat, but they had a lot of heart disease, that wasn't mentioned either. So we really, unfortunately, set off on this path. And then when you have institutions and organizations that tell you to do things, you know, for decades, it's very difficult for them to turn around and say, you know what, boy, we dropped the ball on that one. We were completely wrong. This is what you should do. So even today, the American Heart Association says, you know, you really shouldn't eat a lot of eggs. Although when we look at the data, we find that people who eat eggs have better lipid profiles and cholesterols than people who abstain from eggs. So this whole notion that a healthy omelet is only egg whites, number one, it tastes awful because all the deliciousness is in the yolk. That's all the flavor. And we're not even looking at, gosh, when I get a pastured, free-range, organically raised chicken, the flavor's incredible. So as a chef, I love that. But the nutrition is way superior than these sort of processed and industrially produced foods. So that's something that we really highlight in our culinary medicine course. And the take-home lesson is really simple. You know, you want to do culinary medicine, sure, you can take the course and learn all the reasons behind it. If you want to practice it, like eat real food, mostly plants, eat real food. And that's what your body has been built over hundreds of thousands of years to process. And not only that, these bacteria that we talked about, and to give you an idea how many bacteria there are, you know, I'm in Montana, obviously, so I can go out at night when we'll have a night like tonight where there's no clouds in the sky, and I can see the Milky Way. And when I look up there, there are more bacteria in my gut than there are stars in the sky that I can see.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, you are actually mostly bacteria. And that doesn't even count, there's protozoa, and there's viruses, and these other things living inside you. And so when we look at, you know, human cells versus how many of these bacteria and things there are, they outnumber us anywhere, and we still don't have a good idea, but anywhere about 2 up to 10 to 1. So the cells that constitute your organism, your ecosystem, they're mostly, you know, unidentified fermenting objects called, they're UFOs, they're bacteria. So it's an interesting question as we start to learn that these things can signal us and they can tell us when to stop eating. When you eat a really good meal, a really healthful meal, and you have this healthy bacteria, they secrete serotonin. Well, serotonin goes up to your brain and makes you happy. That's one reason why when you have a really good meal, really good company, you literally feel happy. But it's kind of creepy because it's like the bacteria are secreting the serotonin because you fed them well and they're making you happy. So you want to have that experience again with that food. So like, who's really in charge? It brings up some interesting questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such an interesting and new kind of take on things. So you were mentioning that you kind of written a couple books. So I believe that you've published four, correct?
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you decide to write each of them? Kind of like what was the process on that?
Well, the first one was really sort of a collection of short vignettes. It's got some recipes in it, some of which actually I think I would redo based on the data because that book's probably 8, 10 years old now. And that was just, I've always loved to write. And so for me, it was a way to try to get the word out there because, as I mentioned, you have organizations, you have platforms, you have a huge, you know, there are concerns out there. Take McDonald's, okay, that's one fast food company. If McDonald's was a country, it would have the ninth largest economy in the world. So these companies have resources that are larger than some countries. That's a lot of influence. I mean, you know, every single day, McDonald's serves 1% of the world's population. So in a month, the equivalent of 1 out of 3 people have eaten a McDonald's meal. That's some influence to go along with that money. And so, you know, I'm kind of a grassroots guy. And to get the word out there, people like you are tremendous resources and writing books to put the facts out there. And, the last book, for example, Food Shaman, really talks about the how to pick ingredients, what I call the art of sorcery. How do we source ingredients? As well as kind of these softer edges, because we're learning it's so important, not just what we eat, but how we eat, with who we eat, etc. And put this information out there so people can read it and then make up their own minds. And one of our goals with culinary medicine is to empower people, give you the information. And I don't hide any of the data. I think there's about 40 pages of references because as a cardiologist, if I'm going to go out there and tell you, hey, Mackenzie, you can have a steak tonight, but you got to pick the right kind of meat. You've got to pick it's important how it's raised. I better show you the data that says if you eat that, yeah, you're not increasing your risk of heart disease because that's been drilled into people's heads. So that's one reason, I feel compelled to get out there. I also write a regular column for Psychology Today. So I put those bits out there in shorter form, obviously. But the idea is to get people the information and allow them to make up their minds, but to empower people, and that's what our sort of vision statement is with culinary medicine: empower you, let you make the choices. Because I think especially with COVID coming about, it's changed everything, and people have taken a look because they couldn't go out to the restaurants. They couldn't get their favorite pizza joint or burger joint or whatever, and so that's caused them to really look and be concerned about their health. How can what I eat, help maybe protect me from being vulnerable to these types of illnesses and things like that? And so we want to give, our mission is to give people the tools to empower them to make those decisions. And what we do is what's interesting, and I think it goes back to what I talk about when I say, we're an ecosystem and we're part of this world, we're part of this globe, we're part of this planet. When we choose things that are good for us to eat, it also turns out that it's not just sustainable for us as individuals, but it's a more sustainable approach for the planet. And so how great is that, right? What feeds us, what nurtures us is also something that's good for the bigger scope. So that's an important part of our message. What I call a zero waste kitchen. When we apply specific techniques of cookery and culinary medicine, we're looking to be sustainable for ourselves, and in terms of economics. Because if you have to go out and buy organic carrots, because Chef Dr. Mike told you they're better for you, then you want to be able to use those greens at the top of the carrots. So there's a pesto, You want to use the what we call the trim in the restaurant business, which are the top that you cut off with the little other bits of green stem, the bottoms, and maybe the peelings. That if you do that, and that's what we call trim, tops and tails and trim, and you put that in, and now we'll use it to make a homemade stock. So now it becomes cheap to use an organic carrot because we're using all of it. And as a chef, that's respect for your ingredients. I mean, whether it's a carrot or a cow, this entity has given its life to nurture us. So show it some respect. Every good chef, I think, thinks that way that I've run into in the industry. They're all about, respecting the ingredients. And that means, for me, utilizing all of it in the most, economical kind of way. And it's good, it's sort of just good business as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you make a good point there with sustainability and kind of using like all ingredients, because I think that this will be a topic or a field that like only increases in importance as, like environmental issues become more a bigger deal and stuff like that. So you kind of talk about, like how you're trying to like get out information and just kind of like fact check some popular myths. So
Yes.
I noticed on your blog or on TV, you kind of like myth bust different like, food or health
Yes.
myths. So do you have like a favorite or most interesting myth bust that you'd like to share?
Well, gosh, there's so many of them. We would have to do a whole show on myth busting. But really, one of the ones that we just talked about, right, is this idea that dietary cholesterol impacts your blood lipid. It's not true. Plain and simple. Never has been true. Though for decades, people were told, oh, you can't eat this because it has cholesterol. Don't eat eggs, as we talked about, because it has cholesterol. Turns out that your dietary cholesterol, so when you eat that egg, egg yolks obviously are rich in cholesterol. But we see that when people eat eggs, their blood lipid profile turns out to be better. A shrimp is one of the highest sort of per gram foods in terms of its cholesterol content. Yet when people eat shrimp, they tend to it's part of a healthy diet. So this whole idea that dietary cholesterol impacts, and the other big myth is that dietary sodium impacts. And I think this is maybe one of the ones I sort of get the most pushback on, because people are like, I can't believe that. No, I mean, I was told, if we could cut our sodium, we'd save 100 million lives because it decreased your blood pressure. Well, when the people have to understand that what that is it's based on modeling. It's all computer hypothesis. There has never ever been one study that shows when we drop the sodium in the diet, we save lives. And I'm talking about when all we do is change the sodium. Now I know a bunch of your listeners out there may go, "Hey, wait a second! I heard about this DASH diet," and they said, "Yes, the DASH diet did. It decreased sodium, but it also increased potassium because people ate more fruits and vegetables." And we know that when we adjust that ratio, that does seem to correlate to outcomes. So what I think this sort of whole thing about decreasing the sodium, I think is a red herring. And the reason for that is over 75% of the sodium people get in each day comes from mass-produced industrial pre-processed and ultra-processed food. So when you pick up that label and it says sodium citrate, sodium this, sodium that, because these additives and flavorings and preservatives, that's where the sodium is coming. So I'm going to throw in an alternate hypothesis that says it's not the sodium, it's the processing. It's the adulteration of the food. And in support of that, you don't hear much about in the United States. But an interesting story is, again, we talk about these big, what we call big food, big snack, big soda. Well, some years ago, people in Brazil pretty much ate their natural diet, and they were pretty healthy. Along came big food, big snack, along with a lot of other big things. And the diet started to shift in Brazil, became more like the United States. All of a sudden, they had more diabetes and obesity and heart disease and neurodegenerative diseases. And so some really smart folks at the University of Brazil came up with something they call the NOVA classification of food. And they said, it's silly to be looking at red meat or carbohydrates or protein or fat, because we've adulterated our food so much. We should really look at it as sort of natural, kind of minimally processed, and then they have a category called ultra processed. And when they did that, they found a direct correlation between how much ultra processed food you ate and your risk of disease. So I would argue that this whole sodium mythos just doesn't make sense. I mean, if you look in ancient times, if you go back to the original Mediterranean diet, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard is very healthful, and it is, the original Mediterranean diet had a lot more sodium than we eat today, and the people were healthier. And it's because they ate salt preserved foods. They had cheeses that were like feta cheese and brine, yet they were healthier. So it really, when you look at the data, and it's actually not my opinion. Many European investigators said, this is sort of the biggest scam going. But when you can sell people low sodium this or that and charge them extra for it, hey, that's good business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you kind of like bring up the point where it's like, I mean, I'm in debate a lot, but we call it like correlation versus causation. Like, was like, the cause actually like lead to the effect, or like was it kind of distantly related? And it sounds like that, something with the sodium kind of got lost in translation there a bit. So
It did.
yeah. So we've talked about kind of like a few different like projects and things. So what might be like your favorite part about your job? If you have one favorite part.
Eating the food. Because, and it really is, so the joy of going out there and sourcing the ingredients and when I say eat the food, I mean the fellowship of the food. So sharing recipes, sharing meals, sharing knowledge. This is what the tribal humanity used to do. Before we become more isolated with the social distancing and the COVID pandemic, obviously. But before that, we were kind of on our way, weren't we? I mean, everybody was in their little box. You'd sit next to, and we had our phones. And so, in some ways, this is afford us an opportunity to step back and say, yes, we have a lot of convenience in our culture, but just because it's convenient, just because the food is reproducible, does that mean it's the best way to do it? And so for me, food is, and the food experience is all about fellowship and sharing it. And when we can share those experiences, we can connect as human beings. And what we're finding out through studies looking at now at how people eat, if I could take you back decades ago, I remember as a cardiologist, as a very young cardiologist, looking at studies with meditation and yoga. And people saying, that just relaxing your mind, that can't have like health benefits. That's got to just be kind of some claptrap, poppycock. And yet, study after study, and now we know that there are important, measurable benefits from these types of practices. And so, I think that this gives us an opportunity. Certainly, if we did look at our Introduction to Culinary Medicine course, it's divided into three parts. The first part is just what you asked, what is culinary medicine, and we go through that. And the last part is something we talked about, which is the art of sorcery. So let's look at these different ingredients. But that second bit, I think, is what's missing in so many nutrition-centric approaches, which is how does the human element impact us? We're all different. We all have different favorite flavors and tastes and things that we can eat, and we only have to look at food allergies, right? I can eat a peanut and it gives me great nutrition, and we can share a PBJ with somebody. For someone with a peanut allergy, it kills them. So we're built differently, and to have those different experiences. But when we can connect over food, what we're learning is that it is very, very important for our health. And one of the things, if there's really sort of one thing I'd like to leave your audience with, it's how this connects to what we call the Harvard Happiness Study. So for the listeners who are unfamiliar, this was two different studies done by Harvard University where they followed people for almost 80 years, actually now over 80 years. And they said, what is it that correlates, as you were saying, we don't know what causes, but correlates to a long life, a healthy life, and a happy life. And it wasn't how much money you have. It wasn't your social status. It wasn't where you lived. It wasn't any particular food you ate. It was the quality, specifically not the quantity. So 5,000 Facebook likes doesn't make it, but it's the quality of the relationships you have in your life. And so, to me, in culinary medicine, one of the most important, one of the most basic foundational relationships in our lives is our personal relationship with food. And if that's not healthy, I don't think any of them, it's hard to have a healthy relationship with people when you can't have a healthy relationship with your diet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's so interesting about the culinary med field is that you're kind of like taking that and making it into like a career path or something super interesting. So I guess kind of my next question along this line would be how could like a high school or college students, you could take the culinary med school but course, but maybe like a high school student how could they explore like the culinary med field a little bit deeper?
Well, certainly they can take our course as well. It's open to everyone, and you don't have to have any prerequisites. So we have everyone enjoying the course from chefs to physicians and everybody in between. So all you have to do is bring a curiosity and enthusiasm. And if people wanted to kind of explore it on their own, they could certainly, read the books and, to practice it, as you and I discussed earlier, it's not complicated. So read the books, and it's about shifting your perspective. And so, being aware of what you eat, being mindful when you eat it, maybe sharing a meal, and then noticing the differences. So, culinary medicine always comes back to the individual. And so I think that, those are great starting points to kind of explore it a little bit as we teach it. I actually have some articles just on culinary medicine, psychologytoday.com. People can read them for free. They can obviously pick up the books because they're, I think, less than $20. They can join. We do some practical medicine culinary webinars each month with the university where we're taking the things that we learn in the classroom and saying, how does this work in my kitchen today? And so everybody's welcome to join us on that. Again, no prerequisites required. And for folks that are looking at culinary medicine, we're located actually within the university in the College of Health. And within the college, my appointment is in public health. And so, when I was talking to my dean about developing this course, his vision, and I share it, is that, for somebody, for example, to have a degree in public health and maybe have a minor in culinary medicine, what a great set of skills you bring to this community in looking at some of these communities that have food deserts or how to impact sustainability and address the health of the community at the same time. I also have a cross appointment in the culinary school because this is a joint program with our culinary school as well. And when I talk with my culinary dean, I got two bosses, and she's like, wow, this is great, for chefs to get, and actually one of our students on our online course is a chef. So a chef who wants to go out and maybe do, one of my good friends is cooks for like Tom Cruise and Ringo Starr, and so she's cooks for celebrities, and she applies a lot of these culinary medicine principles. So if somebody wanted to be a private chef and go into that aspect of the industry, it really gives you a leg up on the competition. And for other people who might want to counsel patients, one of our students actually is a social worker. And so she's out counseling people about their health and things like that. And food, everybody's got to eat. So, unlike so much of our society where one part can engage, somebody might never do this, every single human being's got to eat. So this is something that quite literally affects every human being on the planet. So, it's important. And it's something that you can take and make a career out of, apply it to some aspect, kind of like a condiment to whatever you want to do, whether it's social work or medicine, or just use it for yourself, and apply those principles, simply in your own life to be happier and healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that was super interesting how you were talking about how like you can kind of apply culinary medicine on top of all sorts of different careers. So it can be kind
Yeah,
of like combined with whatever your passion is.
yeah.
So yeah, so I think that my next question along this line would be if there's any aspect of your job that's like super challenging, like what do you think is the most challenging aspect?
uh, Coming up against conventional wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's been so ingrained for decades, and when we, like you said, when we go back, we look and we say, wow, the data was never really here. How did this become, the practice? So when I go out and I talk to physicians and I tell them, saturated fat doesn't make you fat, doesn't give you diabetes, and doesn't cause heart disease. You can hear the crickets in the room. And so, being with, and I said this some years ago. We talked about cholesterol, and just a few years ago, within the last 2, 3 years ago, the government actually dropped. It used to be they had a recommendation for no more than 300 grams of cholesterol consumed each day. They actually dropped that recommendation because they said there's no data for it. We were wrong. And as I said, the American Heart Association still tends to push, that particular perspective. But going out and confronting these things, it's tough. Kraft is not going to come out and get behind my message because it's about, people thinking for themselves. It's about sustainability. It's about the danger of these ultra processed foods. That's what we see. So, you're challenging convention, you're challenging big corporations with deep pockets and lots of messengers out there for them. So that's the frustrating part. But every time I get to come out and get to talk to somebody like you, and we can spread that, that excites me. So it's kind of like giving those guys the finger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think that we're kind of like heading towards like the right path as more of these truths are coming to light because even like seeing like, something that like other people in my families have thought was healthy and, like maybe somebody else didn't think that was healthy, like just kind of all the debates on that. I think that we're heading in the right direction now. And I think that you're completely right that it is something that's very politicized because like,
Absolutely.
at the end of the day, it's just like, Kraft or Frito-Lay just trying to sell chips or mac and cheese.
Exactly. And I understand, that's what they do as a corporation. They answer to the shareholders. They've got to make money. And, having a bag of chips now and then is not going to kill you. But the fact that, as I said, 75% of the sodium comes from daily intake comes from these types of foods that we've really become a convenience culture. So we really need to be able to step back like that. I mean, the converse makes sense too, right? Just eating a salad once a month isn't going to make you healthy. Having an ice cream cone a couple of days a year is not going to kill you either. And there are health benefits when it's part of a celebration. But when we're using it as a medication, because actually sugar and fat and salt actually act in the same area of our brain that opioids do, and everybody's heard about, this opioid problem that we have in terms of addiction and so forth. So, when it's 2 a.m. and you're feeling sad and you sit down with Ben and Jerry, to watch TV and eat the entire pint of ice cream, that's not a celebration. I mean, you're sort of self-medicating actually. So when you share a cone with some friends, at the beach in the summer, and it's a great experience, yeah, that is actually kind of a healing meal in some aspects. So we just kind of got to get some balance back in our lives. Like most things in life, it's about balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely agree with what you were just saying. And I think that's something interesting that definitely a lot of people need to learn. So I think that I just have one final wrap up question
Okay.
for you here. So, what advice would you give to aspiring maybe chefs, doctors, or kind of a combination of both?
Be authentic, be true. That is one of the important, really core principles of culinary medicine. It's all about authenticity, being true to yourself, being authentic and picking real foods to eat. So, the next book that I'm in the midst of working on is sort of this. So you picked a great question. It's like my kind of life lessons from culinary medicine, and there's 5 things, and I've actually got them on my board up here. So I look at them every day. One is presence. So be present in the moment. I can tell you, as from a cardiologist perspective, life is precious, and so many people spend it dreaming about the future or reliving the past. And be here, be focused, be in the moment, and enjoy it. That's one. Have patience. When I'm as a chef, when I make risotto, it's 20 minutes. It's not coming any sooner. To make a great risotto is 20 minutes. So, if a great risotto takes 20 minutes, to be great people, we need a lifetime. So it's okay. Be patient with yourself, forgive yourself, and as my martial arts instructor used to tell me, keep going. That's what's important. Be passionate about whatever you choose to do in your life, and what you should do in your life is what you're passionate about. That's why I do culinary medicine, because it's my passion, and it fuels me and makes me happy. Perspective, as we talked about, it's very important, to keep the proper perspective, in the situation. And then the most important thing, because, this has been a challenging road for me, and still many challenges ahead, because, again, most people, culinary medicine sounds great. What is it? So after almost a decade and 4 books, people are still asking me, what is culinary medicine? It's not a household word yet. So be persistent. Don't ever let anybody tell you you can't do something. Just put your mind to it. Be willing to work hard. You'll get there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Chef Dr. Mike. I had a lovely time talking with you. This was great.
It was fantastic. Thank you so much, Mackenzie. I appreciate it.
No problem. A special thanks to Chef Dr. Mike for joining me today. You can check out his website, www.chefdrmike.com, or check him out on Facebook and Twitter at Chef Dr. Mike, or on Instagram at Real Chef Dr. Mike. You can check out this podcast on our website, www.fascinatingjobs.xyz, or on Instagram at fascinating_jobs_pod, or Twitter at fascinatingjobs. Tag me with any questions or comments, and be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to this podcast to let us know you're enjoying it. And if you or someone you know has a fascinating job, email us at fascinatingjobspod@gmail.com for a chance to be a guest on the show. Thank you so much for listening and enjoying this podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.